starts when you start talking. I'm going to stop talking, turn it over to you, and we'll start the recording from there. Sorry about that.
All right, that's okay. Thank you, Doug. Appreciate it. Okay, so let's do this again. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us today for the Global Chamber's monthly Export Import Forum. I am the moderator, Anita Rodal, president of SBPI Services. We connect importers, exporters, and global companies to the best currency exchange company for them based on their location and the countries they do business in or with. I am also very proud to be a member of the advisory board for the Los Angeles chapter of the Global Chamber. The Global Chamber, in case anybody doesn't know, is a growing collaborative community of CEOs, executives, and business leaders in over 525 metro regions around the world. Its mission is to foster growth in cross-border business, trade, and investment in every region of the world by providing its members with warm introductions, valuable connections, and timely information. I invite you to put your contact information in the chat, especially the link to your LinkedIn page. And by the way, don't forget to save the chat. So let me tell you how today's forum will work. For the first 40 minutes or so, I'll be interviewing our amazing expert. And in the last 10 to 15 minutes, we'll open it up to Q&A. So I do want to ask everybody to please mute yourselves now through the first part of the program because it is being recorded. So today we are very lucky to have the amazing, as I already said, Jennifer Diaz with us. Jen, you can call her Jen, is the president and founder of Diaz Trade Law. Jen is a Chambers ranked board certified international attorney specializing in customs and international trade. For more than 17 years, Jen has provided legal advice and customized training on import and export compliance to industry, with a strong record of success in mitigating federal administrative enforcement actions. And I will be asking her about that later on. Jen has received many accolades from the legal community, including being recognized by super lawyers as a top international attorney. She has served as president of both the international and the South Florida branches of the Organization of Women in International Trade, OWIT for short. A frequent media commentator, Jen has authored book chapters for the Florida Bar and the American Bar Association, numerous Bloomberg Law articles, and other leading publications. Jen is the editor of the Customs and International Trade Law blog, which has been recognized by the U.S. Library of Congress as being an important part of the legal historical record. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you so much, Anita. It's great to be here with all of you today, and huge thanks to Jacob for coming back for round 2, and shout out to Robert Becerra. He's our trusted right hand when it comes to criminal matters, which we'll talk about today because things are getting criminal these days. Not anything we want to see, but we're seeing a huge uptick in that. So thanks to all of you for being with us today, and would love to hear from all of you. So as you have comments or feedback, really raise your hand, step up, and let's all make this as interesting and collaborative as possible so everybody hopefully learns something new. Told Robert my goal today is to say one thing that he doesn't already know. So if we could teach Robert something new today, I'd be a really happy camper.
Awesome. Actually, we're going to save the questions till the end for the Q&A thing because I want to get through all the questions that you and I had talked about. No problem.
Sure.
Love interactive. That's why we save a part of it for it. So let's dive into it. The first 4 questions I ask everybody, you already answered the first one, which is how long have you been in this globally oriented line of work? It's in your bio. So let me just start with this one. What got you into international trade law?
Accident. It's either people were born into it in my world where it's 18th generation, whatever, and we have a lot of people in our world that are my mom owned, blah, 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 my father owned, blah, 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 and I'm in it. But for me, it was my 12th internship in law school, and I picked Becker and Polyakov as my firm, and I was in a business law clinic. I was actually paying to clerk, so that's how it worked in law school. You paid a whole lot of money, and then you worked your tush off. So that was your potential opportunity for a good job. So I wanted a larger firm that I would, have a harder time getting into by myself. I didn't have friends in high places that could just sneak me in. And I picked the firm and physically walked into an interview, and it was international or nothing. And I said, okay, international it is. I didn't know what that meant. And I quickly ask questions about, all right, what do I read? What do I, what do I do? How do I prepare for this? There is no preparing for it. I learned on the job and fell in love with the profession because it's so different. Every day is something different, even almost 20 years later. Every single day is something
I'm
different,
sure.
some new challenge, some new rule regulation. It's an ever-changing world. So if people like me feel like you have adult ADHD, this is a great profession for you because you're always switching gears.
Right. You're never bored, which is awesome. Okay, so real quick, because I want to get into the like
Yeah,
the nuts and bolts,
yeah.
but like 30 seconds or less, what do you like the most about what you do? I think you kind of alluded to it that you're
I
never
think I
bored.
already said
But
it. Yeah, never.
yes.
It's always changing and you're always learning something new, whether you like it or not.
Okay, cool. And then the flip side of that is what do you like the least about what you do?
You never really have a day off. Your brain is always there itself, and it's always an emergency. So you really stepping away is difficult. I take on
Okay,
my
and that
clients' issues as if they're my own and take it probably too personally because you want the best result. And at the end of the day, you have a really hard time stepping away from it and not taking it personally,
yeah. No, I'm sure. And I mean, international trade, it's a 24-hour a day endeavor. Okay. So let's get into some general questions about what you do. And again, we'll keep these to like a minute, minute and a half,
Sure.
answers because I want to make sure we have time for everything. So the first one is, what are some common misconceptions importers may have about Customs and Border Patrol?
So patrol first is the first misconception. That's the border. That's where we deal with people. We're today going to be talking about the protection aspect. So CBP is U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and they deal with the
That's what I meant.
cargo
Sorry.
aspect.
Yeah.
All good.
Yeah.
That's number one in terms of a common misperception that we hear a lot of. We hear a lot of patrol, and it's like we're dealing with the cargo side, not the people side. So there are 328 ports of entry coming into the U.S., and what happens is importers unfortunately incorrectly think importing's super easy. I get an invoice from a supplier, I pick a really cool item, I pick a US customs broker, and they deal with everything. They deal with the compliance, they deal with everything. I don't have to think. My broker thinks for me. So yesterday I was speaking to a potential client who said, "Oh my God, I have an emergency. My goods are on hold. US Consumer Product Safety Commission, they're not happy." Who knew that CPSC cared, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, CPSC, who knew they cared about sweaters with drawstrings? Does anybody know that CPSC cares about sweaters with drawstrings? Yeah, they do. And the drawstrings are a hazard and are likely going to have to be removed, and the goods are likely going to have to be exported or destroyed. But you know what she told me? My favorite part. But I asked my broker before I imported, and my broker didn't tell me that there was going to be a problem with this. So isn't this his fault? Isn't this my broker's liability? Awesome. We get that a lot. And Robert can tell you because he fights in court. I'm the nice person that only, fights on paper and fights on the phone. I don't fight in court. So I like to keep it outside of the courtroom itself. But the number one misconception I see is my broker was responsible. My broker was supposed to do everything for me. And how dare that broker not know everything? And the fun part is when you import, you sign a power of attorney that gives your customs broker the right to file an entry on your behalf. And it's subject to terms and conditions. Now, take a wild guess, all of you. What do you think the broker's liability is? Robert, you can't answer this one. What do you think the broker's limitation of liability is per entry, Anita? Not
I'm guessing
zero.
it's close to zero.
50 freaking bucks an entry. That's it. 50 freaking bucks. So now this particular
Wow.
broker caused an error that's going to be however many hundreds of thousands of dollars later, right? Where they have a CPSC ding. They're getting demurrage fees by the day because shipments are just sitting at the border while CPSC inspects and holds and takes goods for lab testing and takes months to make up their decision for the admissibility. Is the broker responsible? No. Good luck suing the broker. You're going to spend more on legal fees. So I call that spending good money after bad, In that particular realm, I don't love it, but the number one misconception is I get a broker, I get a customs bond, and I don't have to worry about it. Other thing. And it's 100% incorrect. Importing is hard. There's a lot of rules. 47 federal regulatory agencies. 47.
Wow, that's insane.
It's
I did not know
psycho.
that number.
Yeah.
Oh, so let me ask you this. So what are some uncommon compliance risks that importers often overlook?
Ugh.
And how is there a way to proactively
A
handle
lot.
those?
Yeah. I would say, look, number one and number two. Number one is they don't follow my top 10 tips. Those top 10 tips I think are a godsend if importers actually follow them. So I'll put the link in the chat box before today's over for it. And it's on our site itself, and it's a biggie. And number one on our top 10 tips is, what federal agency actually regulates my goods? Who out of that 47? So one of my fun stories is, in one of my favorites, a first importation. Imagine importing a little cute toy motorcycle, but it has candy inside of it. Which federal government agencies regulate that particular toy? And if it's a toy, we have, and I'm going to tell you, to give you a hint, it's geared towards children under the age of 12. So you have U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, because they regulate the safety of the toy itself. Now, this cute little toy had handlebars that could pop off and become a choking hazard for the kids. So guess what? You just pissed off CPSC. If you imported these previously, you have a recall issue and potentially a criminal issue, because God forbid a child chokes and dies on this thing. Then you have Food and Drug Administration for the food product, right? And who knows that food products, if you have an artificial color in your particular food product, it has to be from an approved source. How many people actually know that? That colors have to come from a certified color facility. Otherwise, if the color isn't certified, you can't use it. Well, did they do that? No. And then they use trademarks on their cute little toy motorcycle without actually thinking about intellectual property rights and getting permission from the owner of that particular trademark. So he could have gone to jail from CPSC. FDA was extra pissed. Customs is extra pissed. This poor guy spent 2 years of his first importation with me, making sure he didn't go to freaking jail for this importation, didn't have monster penalties and fines for the rest. This follows. Takes 5 years for customs to be officially done with the case, but that sucks on all fronts. Imagine that being your first importation experience. Now, I talked that guy out of importing, because I'm like, if you're not going to do your homework, buddy, this isn't for you. You were buying locally from another distributor. Life was easy peasy selling your candy, baby. But the minute you want to start importing yourself, if you don't know who the hell regulates your particular product, he doesn't know that CPSC is involved, FDA is involved, customs is involved. That's sucky. It's up to you as the importer to use reasonable care when you're importing. You got to put skin in the game. That's your job. Your job is to come to the party prepared. And if you don't come to the party prepared and use quote unquote reasonable care, which I just put in the chat box, it's one of my favorite articles that I wrote for Bloomberg, is what is your obligation as an importer? Your obligation is to use reasonable care. That's an actual test. But guess what? It's a subjective crappy test, because what would a like importer do importing a similar freaking commodity? Well, a like importer that knew what they were doing would follow CPSC, would follow FDA, would follow customs, would actually have authorization to use a trademark before using it, would purchase colors from a certified source, would check the labeling of the product prior to using it, and would go to a CPSC approved laboratory to test the freaking toy before importing it. But if you don't know what you're doing and don't know how to find all these sources, what do? If you don't have the right parties in place and the right people having your back before you start the process, life could suck.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. Okay, real quick, what are anti-dumping countervailing duties, and what are some of the key red flags that importers should be aware of when, regarding their enforcement and effectively mitigating risk? And keep this brief, because I've got a bunch of other questions I want to get through.
Anti-dumping stinks, and this is, I would say, the biggest issue right now that we are seeing within the customs world, and why I talk to Robert more times a week than here. I probably want to talk to each other, although I really love the man. We're talking too often, Robert. It's just too much. And ultimately, it's because of anti-dumping and countervailing duties. Think of it this way, Anita. Let's say you're a producer of, you pick a product. Pick any product, Anita. Make it up.
Tea.
Perfect. You're making tea in the US and you love your tea. It's phenomenal tea. I'm making tea in India, and I'm getting government subsidies in India to make my tea and to sell it in the United States at less than fair market value. So what does that do? I'm putting you out of business, Anita. So what do? You complain to the US government saying, this Jen sucks. She's making tea in India. She's selling it for a penny a bag of tea. I can't compete. I'm going out of business. I am done. Do something about it, U.S. government. U.S. government then tries to investigate me and says, all right, what are you doing in India? How much does this tea actually cost? Are you selling it at less than fair market value to screw with our Anita? Because how dare you mess with Anita? Anita needs to make a living in the United States. She has jobs. She's hardworking in the United States. Don't you mess with her. And I have to prove how much it cost me to make that particular tea and whether or not the Indian government is subsidizing me. The subsidization from the Indian government is the countervailing portion. The selling at less than fair market value is the anti-dumping portion. This investigation, the longest I ever saw was one case where an investigation lasted 17 years. 17 years. My client's final bill, the interest, because that accumulates if you don't actually pay a deposit at the time of entry, was more than the actual principal after 17 years, okay? So the US government goes through this investigation process itself, but now what's happening is the crappiest percentage of anti-dumping countervail that I've ever seen is 1,700%. Now I want you to think, Anita, if I'm selling tea for a penny and the US government levies a 1,700% anti-dumping duty on my particular product, how does anybody recover from that? You can't, because it's unanticipated if you don't think about it or do the research at the beginning. So the first portion of the top 10 tips as well is, all right, who regulates you? And is your product subject to anti-dumping or countervailing duties? What should you be looking at? You've got to look at the scopes by country. You've got to use the Access search portal. You've got to actually look at whether or not your particular goods are covered by anti-dumping or not covered by anti-dumping. I'll put a couple resources in the chat box for anyone who wants to learn more, because to me, this right now is the #1 risk, and it's also what we call a priority trade initiative from US Customs, meaning US Customs is on this like white on rice. They want to know that everybody's paying their anti-dumping or countervailing duties promptly and fairly at the time of entry. So Customs is the enforcement agency for the Department of Commerce. So another misperception. The Department of Commerce levies and issues the scope for anti-dumping and countervailing duties, and US Customs is the bully at the door. They're the bouncer. They're the collection agency, ensuring that the money is collected at the border. If you don't pay, Customs comes for you. They're the bounty hunters coming for you.
So the countervailing duties are kind of like what a handicap is in golf. If you're playing with somebody,
I know nothing about golf, so you have to teach me.
No, I'm not the person. I just know that there are handicaps to kind of even the playing field.
Yeah, the bottom line is even the playing field. Exactly.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to. Fairness. So EAPA, can you tell us what the acronym stands for and explain its implications for importers and how they can ensure compliance in a minute or less?
EPA is, I think, the worst thing that happened in customs. Personally, it's in 2015, there's the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Fairness Act. And the idea is in the Enforce and Protect Act, the thought process behind it is so that you have a tattletale program. So I can say, Customs, Robert is screwing the system. He's not paying the appropriate amount of AD/CVD. Here's my investigation about him. Go get him, baby. Customs goes after Robert in a secret proceeding, not providing Robert all of the details, giving him confidential reports of what I told Customs, not giving him all the info, and Robert has to spend all of his time and resources basically putting small businesses out of business to prove that I'm full of it, and he's done everything he needs to do compliantly without having the full story of the investigation against him. So you have two administrative portions with Customs where you fight on paper before you then have the right to go to court, and only when you go to court do you get the full record used against you to then rebut. It is, I think, one of the most unfair processes in customs law, where I can tell you stories for days about companies that are actually doing the right thing, and we have to go to court to get the record to finally get it overturned. And by that time, my poor client's out of business with no remedy.
And there's no way to get that law. What would it take to get that law changed? Like, if there's somebody, a senator or some committee in Congress that
best of luck, because the people it screws are the smaller guys, and who lobbies the hardest? The US producers that are really ecstatic about this law because you get to have the tattletale provisions, and it screws with importers, and importers don't necessarily lobby for this, and or small businesses don't have the deep pockets to do so. So you don't necessarily have a crew that's behind it that has deep enough pockets to be listened to.
Okay, wow, that's crazy. That's very I'm sorry to hear all that. Okay, so let's switch gears and now get a little bit more specific. We're going to talk about rights, violations, and penalties. So a couple questions in each. So with regarding rights, what are the CBP recordations?
So to me, how many of you have a brand? If you have a brand at all, everybody hears about USPTO. That's the first thing everybody hears about. Protect my brand. And I go to USPTO to tell the world it's mine. Don't touch it. Stay off, honey. Fine, easy. 6 months, 8 months, a year, whatever it takes to work on registering your brand with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. But most people don't realize, and I think US Customs unfortunately does a piss poor job of advertising the amazing program that they have in place, because Customs acts as your actual policeman at the border. So my brand, Diaz Trade Law, let's say that I was smart enough to register it with the United States Patent and Trademark Office so nobody else can use Diaz Trade Law. And then Robert, because we're going to make him the bad guy since he only represents the good guys. Robert uses Diaz Trade Law. He puts it on shirts and he tries to sell it. And I have already registered my DTL brand with USPTO. And then I also recorded my DTL brand with US Customs. So Customs gives you the opportunity to record a registered brand. I have to prove that I'm already the owner of it, legally, lawfully, via USPTO, in order for Customs to then say that I have the rights to record that brand with US Customs. Now, when I record that brand with Customs, I give Customs the ability to enforce, to help protect me, because Customs wants to protect US rights holders. Amazing program in that regard. So Customs at all the borders will say, wait a minute, in your application, you didn't say that Robert had the right to be an importer. Who's this Robert guy? And Customs would call me and say, hey, you know anything about this Robert guy? And I'd say, seize that sucker. Take it, Customs. He's a bad guy that's counterfeit goods. And Customs would know that because I'd say the products, for example, should only be made in Italy. That Robert guy probably made the products in China, huh? Customs would be like, yeah, country of origin's China. How'd you know? Cheapy knockoffs from him. Perfect. Another reason to seize the goods. So I teach Customs how to proactively protect my brand. So Customs can go after the bad Roberts of the world. So Customs seizes the goods from Robert, and then Customs issues a penalty to Robert for what I would sell the goods for. So imagine Gucci, right? My highest penalty is about $4 million. Gucci, Louis, blah, blah, all the sexy brands. My guy bought it for 20 grand, but it's a $4 million penalty because that's what the Cartiers and the Gucci's actually cost. And then I have to fight to mitigate that penalty with Customs. So my 4 million, I got down to 4,000. That's not a typical result. Typically we get about 10%. Usually you'd get 400,000, not a 4,000 mark. But imagine Customs will literally seize goods, issue penalties, and tell you who the bad guy is so you can go after them for $190 for 10 years worth of protection. It is psycho that more people don't actually take advantage of this program. And I honestly don't understand why. So if anybody practices in the IP space and can tell me why they don't force all of their clients that register trademarks to thereafter record those trademarks with Customs, I would love to hear it, because we should get constant calls about the amazing efficacy of this particular program, because about 30,000 seizures occur per year. That's about the national average. And then there are penalties that are issued, and Customs issues, figure in fiscal year 2022, over 2,000 penalties every year for trade penalties. Now, they're not going to tell us exactly what those total amounts are for IPR related concerns, but it's a lot. You know, it's the program itself is only as effective as the participants. And if you don't participate in the program, you don't get the protection.
So they issue these fines, but they can't compel them to comply. That you have to then go after them in an international court of law to collect? Or how
No,
does
no,
that
no,
work?
not how that works. Different. US Customs is the arbiter. US Customs issues a penalty. It's an intellectual property rights penalty pursuant to 19 USC 1526F, whatever. So you have your fancy schmancy law that says, I, Customs, have the right to penalize the bad Robert of the world because how dare you, Robert? You imported a counterfeit good. So here is your penalty from US Customs and Border Protection, separate and apart from me privately going after Robert. I separately get to sue him under the Lanham Act. I separately get to send a cease and desist letter to him. But US Customs then gets to seize his goods and issue a penalty. And also Customs can then get their counterparts, Homeland Security, to go after him criminally if he's a repeat offender.
In terms of them issuing the fine, one thing is to issue a fine, another thing is to collect on it. Do they have
They don't
the
publish.
teeth and the arms to collect?
Well, that's not, they don't publish statistics on what they actually collect from those. Companies can go out of business and notoriously do. What happens more off is we see numbers, for example, for anti-dumping countervailing duties, because that number is in the billions in terms of money that customs claims is owed to customs. And quite often we see companies going belly up because they don't have the ability to pay. For IPR violations, customs only publishes, for example, some enforcement. So figure, we got this from customs directly. At the end of fiscal year 2023, the IP enforcement branch of customs was enforcing 19,886 active recordations. To me, that is piss poor. Less than 20,000 trademarks are actively recorded with US Customs when there are millions of trademarks that exist. So less than 20,000 companies are pursuing CBP protection. And out of that, when it comes to the IPR actual penalties that are issued, we know it has teeth in regards to the program itself because customs can physically send that penalty. It is scary to have those penalties itself issued. And if the company doesn't go belly up, then customs can pursue it and the Department of Justice can go after it. I haven't seen customs utilize that power yet. Personally,
go into their coffers, not to you. Wouldn't be remitted to you as something you're entitled to.
No, it's not that nice. Anti-dumping
Right. Okay.
is different. For example, in the anti-dumping world, if the government collects, remember going back to your tea, Anita, technically the government's supposed to make Anita whole, but by the time they actually make you whole, you're out of business already.
Okay, got it. Okay. All right. Let's see. What else did I want to ask you? Okay, so let's talk about violations. What types of products are most commonly found by CBP to have violations, and how common is it? And what percentage are intentional versus unintentional? Let me know if you
Nah.
forget any of those parts along the way.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, there are 10 centers of excellence and expertise via US Customs, where things like pharma is split out from ag, is split out from electronics, and so on. Every single one of those centers is actively enforcing particular goods for different things. So, I mean, there are trends in agriculture that are different than trends in electronics. Like, for example, for electronics, we're seeing the solar industry is hot and heavy with new anti-dumping scopes and orders and customs validating certifications. And so, like, there's nitty gritty for each one of those particular areas in regards to what we're seeing wrong. Now, for example, cosmetics are becoming heavily regulated. So we're dealing with MOCRA, the modernization of customs of the cosmetics. And the idea there is we have to register the cosmetics, and now we're going to have to deal with ingredient listings for cosmetics, and it's a mandatory program with FDA. So we often see companies underestimate the importance of following all the steps and understanding what's required for the importation process. That's the most common. Most common is I saw whatever online, I want to sell it on Amazon, and who can stop me? I'm going for it. And then seeing US Customs thereafter seize goods or take goods or detain goods. We're seeing a lot of violations with what's called the de minimis program. Like, if you're importing less than $800 per day of whatever, this is common e-commerce. Every single one of us is an importer. If you go on Amazon and you don't have your Prime setting on, you're likely importing from whatever country itself. Are you asking all the right questions to ensure you are importing a compliant product? It's a guarantee that you're not. It's a guarantee that you yourselves could have non-compliant imports for your de minimis shipments. So, for example, you import a medical device online. Well, are you a medical device importer? Have you registered with the FDA to be such? Likely not, because why would you pay $7,000 for a $500 gadget that you're buying online? You wouldn't. So it's an interesting misperception about how easy it is to import and how overcomplicated the process truly is, and how difficult it is to gather and ascertain the correct information that you should gather, and to believe that your customs broker should just know everything about 47 federal regulatory agencies, all of their laws, regulations, and everything in between. And in reality, that's why people like me wind up dealing with enforcement matters much more than compliance matters, because less people put budgets or teeth into compliance programs before they get the, oh no, I'm in trouble. Customs and or federal regulatory agency is already yelling at me. Now I'll spend the money on you because I really need you because I just spent $1 gazillion on whatever product and I don't have it anymore. So I'm being yelled at. So now I'm yelling at you to fix it. But it's a lot harder for me to fix it when I didn't help you at the beginning.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. And let me just throw a question here about, because you mentioned, we keep coming back to the customs brokers and such. Do you, like, if you have an importer who's just very, very on top of things, do they ever put you in touch with their customs brokers and say, can you
All
please
the
inform
time.
this person? Like, so that really they have their team assembled so that the customs broker is informed by you, so everybody's working towards the same goal.
100% in my perfect world. Yeah, it's a team. We all love each other. We work together. And
Yes.
that's a perfect world where clients say who's, what broker, and they're brokers that technically specialize in commodities. There are some that are really good with wood flooring and some that are better with perishable goods and some that are better with, whatever the specific items are. Some brokers truly do have technical specialties in specific items with specific federal regulatory agencies. I say grill the broker at the beginning, make sure so some of the top questions to ask a broker, especially at the beginning, have you ever worked with my particular commodity? Have you worked with my particular countries of origin? Like, how would you deal with customs? So, like, let's say my goods get stopped. How long does it take you to communicate with me? How do I get updated? What's our process? How are you going to work with me? Am I going to have to call a 1-800 number? Who do I have access to? Do I actually have a representative? I mean, when you're dealing with the big UPSs, FedEx, DHLs of the world, let me know if you get a personal contact. Let me know if you don't get a 1-800 number. Let me know how it is for you to get personal information. Let me know how you get your entry packet. Oh, wait, it's consolidated. I don't even get an entry packet. We hear all of those things all of the time. And if you don't, no, here's another fun one. I'm dealing with the freight forwarder. They deal with the broker. I don't need to deal with the broker. I don't even know who my broker is. No, all problematic. Don't want to hear
Wow.
any of those things. But in a perfect
Yeah.
world, we set up compliance at the beginning. We all hug and kiss, and we work on a seamless importation process because the broker gets the compliance information from my team. And then, voila, we have a good invoice. We have the right registration. We have the right processes in place. And then you have a seamless importation. But I will tell you that happens in less than 5% of importations.
I'm sure. Everybody's kind of flying by the seat of their pants, and
Because
yeah.
why not,
Um,
right? It's more fun that way.
it's fun until it's not fun. It's like my little personal rule of thumb is there's never a problem until there's a problem.
Bingo.
That's wrong. Okay, so you mentioned that one case where you got the fine from 4 million reduced to 400,000, and I saw a bunch of them on your website, which I just thought were fascinating because obviously you help people protect each other, and then you also do defense work where people are fined and you help them reduce that. So out of the many that you've done, because I want to, in like 4 minutes, I want to open this up to Q&A. But in the meantime, what is the most interesting case that you worked on where you got one of those fines reduced significantly for a client?
Yeah, I mean, we do this every day. So, I mean, they're not interesting anymore in that regard, in that it's nothing new. Like, it's nothing newer or sexy in terms of penalty reduction. It's just we always have different strategies depending on the case in regards to how we're going to play it. Like at the beginning, the real question is like, what did you get this penalty for? Is it a first violation? Is it not? And we just see trends in the industry, but the penalty cases are less, I would say, interesting in that regard. It's more so there's the mitigation strategies that you're using for them. So now we're doing a lot of remedial action work, meaning why should customs trust you that this particular violation is not going to recur? So we see a lot of like wood packaging material violations, my pallet. So when you think about I got little pallets all over the place, these cute little pallets, little notepads. So this is wood packaging material, the pallet that your goods come on. And God forbid there's a pest on it. God forbid it's not properly treated. God forbid it's not properly stamped. God forbid the stamp bleeds off. Customs is now issuing penalties for the value of your entire shipment, not the value of whatever it was that was not properly stamped or the value that whatever the hell had the bug in it, the whole damn thing. And that can be a lot. It's a lot of money. We have one client that had like 30 shipments at the same time. So I think the more interesting, convoluted, complex ones are the ones that intrigue me the most now. And those are the ones where it's like, all right, well, we have a systemic problem here. How do we get to the root of that particular problem? How do we squash this? Because this sucks for you and your entire supply chain. Every single shipment thereafter gets stopped. We had like 36 cases for this one importer at the same time. So that was like psycho to manage and map out and to get through, because the penalties are incredibly substantial. And then coming up with a strategy for this client to wipe out the actual problem at the root. That's to me where it gets really interesting. So all of those are getting mitigated. We're doing great with all of those ultimately, but those are the juicier, more complicated ones as they arise.
So incredibly interesting. And the thing about pallets, all of a sudden you got me thinking, because my niece had an issue with bug infestations in one of her tea shipments during the pandemic. But we don't know where it came from. And everybody said, no, it wasn't us. Even, just I could go on for
That's
hours
my
about
favorite.
it.
It wasn't me is my favorite. It
Wasn't
wasn't
me.
me.
Bring something back to the pallets, like somebody used a new source, like their shipment in India or China for their tea product, used a new supplier for pallets that wasn't approved. And so with their insurance with that supplier, if they I
Yeah.
mean, one thing is them saying, yeah, it was our problem. Another is
I
like trying
haven't
to
seen a
collect.
good insurance policy yet.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a little scary, but okay. All right. So we are at about 12:45, at least in California. So I want to open it up to Q&A, because I've seen a lot of comments flying back and forth. And so I am assuming that there are questions in there. So everybody can feel free to unmute yourselves and let me know if you have any questions. Elizabeth, how did I know that you were going to do that?
Hi there. Excellent presentation. Thank you. All importers and exporters should be listening to you. But I'm
I think
curious
so.
about.
How do we make that happen, Elizabeth?
Oh, hey, if I knew that, we need to team up, because I work on the export side, and especially with small companies. What percentage of companies is your experience that they do it incorrectly? And I agree with you. If they're not attentive with detail, they have no business in trade, I think.
I don't disagree with you. And the majority are smaller businesses that are making the errors because they're so ecstatic, but they're so small. They don't have the compliance room or space. They're so invested in sales and marketing. Compliance, isn't that my broker or forwarder's job? I mean, that's the number one thing we hear. And I mean, there's stupid mistakes. I didn't file an EEI and I thought my forwarder was filing it. Well, your goods are now seized because you didn't communicate and or do any minuscule amount of research to figure out what your requirements were to export before you started exporting. So great job. Let's fix this. How many companies have an export compliance plan? Minuscule. So we set up export compliance plans routinely. How many companies have import compliance plans? Zero, because you have to be a large company to want an import compliance plan. It have to be. So when I have a client going through a merger or acquisition, going through due diligence, all of a sudden I have to get an import compliance plan ready on the stat just so they could sell the entity, not so they could use my beautiful piece of art.
Right.
But just to be marketable to sell. But how many companies want to utilize that on a normal day by day? I'm doing a training that's going to be a half day in May, just talking about import compliance side by side with a customs broker to go through the nitty gritty details of what I want everyone to have in place. And I have clients that go to the same thing every damn year. And I'm like, all right, what did we learn? Are we taking this away? Are we going to bring this home this year? I mean, to me, the best incidents are the times where the clients actually are the smaller ones that learn what we teach them and that actually utilize that knowledge on a day-to-day. That's what makes my heart, much bigger, if they can actually take that info and then practice it on a day-to-day, but they have to be willing to learn.
Well, and that's what also gives them their competitive advantage, because if they're easy to work with, then they're going to build their business. The other thing is that I tell, and I'm sure it's on the import side as well, as the importer of record or the exporter of record, you are ultimately responsible for
Preach,
what
baby.
goes wrong.
Preach. Tell them. You tell them. And you tell me who listens to you, because I say it all day.
Keep up the good work.
Question for you.
You too.
So what about things that aren't tangible, like IT, some kind of a software application or something like that? Can CBP be involved in that, or does that go in a different direction?
It still does. So I'll tell you something we're working on right now which I thought was interesting. Every day there's something new that pops up. Missile technology for an aircraft. And it's like, and then it winds up getting seized by customs because customs says BIS required a license before the exportation of that particular item. So quite often you have the pointing the fingers of whether or not you did your due diligence prior to exporting a certain item. So that's where technology comes into play a lot more, because there could be technological aspects that really do require a license by the Bureau of Industry and Security prior to exportation. And if you don't think of this and get this in hand prior to, then you have to prove a negative after the fact. So we actually have a very good argument that this particular missile technology, it's really just a how far up are you in the air that you could use for a commercial aircraft, but it's called something extra sexy that it, you know, it could be used, but it's not. It's not the actual use. It's not the intended recipient. There is no military use. There are exceptions for civil aircrafts and whatever particular. Now it's our job to write up a whole memo on this thing and get BIS to agree to it, to then get customs to be told by BIS to agree to it, to get this thing released. It's going to take a year. It's a year of everybody's life that they're not going to get back, when all they had to do at the beginning is talk to me or Elizabeth and spend 60 days with us to get this validated prior to, and then we wouldn't have had this problem. But it's okay. Let's spend the next year together, buddy. So we are.
You get to know people that way.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it's crazy. Does anybody else have any questions? Oh, okay, you have to go.
I'm
Okay, no
more
problem.
intrigued about something. I just like, since you brought up that the mapping of value chains, and how much is that coming into play now, and how much work
So
is
we talked
needed?
about that last time in a forced labor context. So just to fill everybody up to speed, that's another fun aspect that's becoming a priority trade initiative for US Customs. So Customs used to have a rule that said if we need it bad enough in the United States, we don't care if the good is made with forced labor. That also changed with TIFTIA. The idea now is if it's made with the use of forced labor, too bad, don't want it in the United States in any way, shape, or form. I think everybody can agree on that. So now what Customs is saying is, in order to eradicate forced labor from your supply chain, it's up to you to map your supply chain to know who your business partners are and where they're buying everything from, down to the actual studs, down to the raw materials. So when we're dealing with cotton, down to the cotton bale from your cotton t-shirt. So you must know the cotton source. You're dealing with the tomato, I want to know the soil. I want to know where it's being dug up from. I want to know it all. This can become a lot. You're buying a shirt on Amazon, you'd never know anything else. Yes, exactly, Jacob. So at this stage, it's going to become really interesting. So now the data software companies are selling their traceability as a get to know you platform as well. So now how do we eradicate money laundering and bad guy things, Robert? You know, well, who am I doing business with? Where are my bad guys? Who do my bad guys? Who's everybody in bed with? And you get to know more and more when you have software that quote unquote tells you which guy is in business with which guy and which guy. But now at the end of the day, if you don't get a detailed report that says what you're going to do with that intel. So my fun questions thereafter is, all right, so I get a big report that says my guy may be a bad guy and may have access to this bad guy. All it does is force you to ask more and more questions and question your particular relationship. It's a starting point to lead you to doing more and more due diligence on your business partners and on who you're going to source from and who you're going to supply from. And it's going the way of, it's going to be a more of a forced thing in the future as CTPAT progresses. For those of you not involved in CTPAT, it's something to think about. It's a Customs and Trade Partnership Against Terrorism. You prove to Customs your supply chain secure. Customs is supposed to give you front of the line privileges and treat you better than everybody else. Release more of your shipments, reduce your penalties, be nicer to you, allegedly. Most companies do report some element of benefit that they really do enjoy the program for. But within that program, now you have to do money laundering tracing. You're going to have to know who your business partners are. How do you know that your guys are good guys, not bad guys? How do you know what's going on with who you're in bed with? Who are your business partners? What are you doing to validate or vet them? How do you know that they're okay? How do you know that they're good? And then there's an expectation now. Ultimately, one of the software providers said in one of their advertisements, they couldn't tell us who, but a company that utilized their software put that in their CTPAT application, that they use sexy software to validate business partners to get really crazy, fabulous, detailed reports on them. And CTPAT not only approved their CTPAT application, They made them a tier 3, basically top of the line importer. You have 1, 2, and 3. Tier 3 is I go above and beyond and I'm a rock star. They became a tier 3 status provider strictly because of the use of their software. So ultimately, I see that that's where the world is going to be going. If you don't have the money, have the tools, have the equipment to know who you're in bed with and what you're using to validate these particular partners, you're going to be SOL. So the fun part is where the money is going to come from to do this and whether the small guys are still going to have a seat at the table.
So let me ask you something along those lines. Fair trade. So different countries have, you know, they have programs for fair trade. I don't think we do it here in the US, but and I don't know what the particulars are about being quote unquote fair trade. But if you are dealing with a certified fair trade partner from a particular country, does that kind of help package that part of the supply chain in any way, shape, or form to make things a little bit easier?
Depends who you ask. I just brought on somebody that specializes in that, in the green market itself and sustainability, because we're getting some questions like that. So I have an expert on our team that just deals with the environmentally friendly, whatever. So I think it's a start. Ultimately, you have, in order to make those claims, you allegedly have to put information in whatever system to have whatever third-party NGO give you that whatever seal. So the question is always, who's giving you whatever seal and what process are they utilizing to give you that seal? It's different than, for example, the organic program with USDA. In order to be an organic producer and utilize the organic, you've got to go to a certifier that physically has to validate your particular entity. And you know they went to the farm. You know that they've validated and inspected. For some of these validations and inspections, are they real validations? Are they real inspections? Is somebody really visiting you? You know, to me, it's as good as, you know, the source of the information. So I'd always want to know more about what they're actually doing to get that stamp or seal. So good to see you, Leslie.
Oh, good. Yeah. And Leslie, you had a question.
Hey, Jen. Hi, Anita. Yeah. So actually more like a comment, because we're seeing this with our clients, and the supply chain traceability point. And I bring this up because I heard you guys talking a lot about the small and medium sized importers and exporters. And how, I mean, this is, in my opinion, completely unachievable for the small guys.
Agreed.
Yeah, starting out, and there have to be more options. There have to be other ways to find the solution, especially because many of the supply chain traceability tools really aren't tracing it down to your shipment. So it's useless for customs purposes. And I was just wondering, Jen, if you were seeing that, you know, it's helpful if you're a big company and you're doing risk analysis. But until you can make that connection, and that's what we're helping companies do right now, is making that connection between the supply chain tracing and mapping and your specific product SKU shipment.
So let's be clear. Customs has a crazy requirement that you provide clear and convincing evidence that your entire supply chain is free of forced labor. That is virtually impossible to do once the goods have already arrived in the United States and you're playing catch up. If you're not doing this in advance of importation to the United States, you are way behind the 8 ball, and the ability to do so within the limitations of time that you have are virtually impossible. So some software providers that we're seeing, for example, like, to give you an example of one that I've tested and looked at a little, is Trade Verified. I thought their platform was interesting because they're a partner of Earthstream. Earthstream costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, but Trade Verified, they're trying to do on $100 to $200, for example, per shipment basis. Now, again, Leslie, I've asked Eric Choi, CBP, so I get you a sexy report from a sexy data company that says no sexy relationship here. Is that clear and convincing? No, it's not good enough. That alone is never going to be good enough. So all it does is give you an idea of the assessment of risk that you're going to take on whether or not you may or may not be pulled over. But if you're pulled over by customs, customs has already validated and said they're spending millions of dollars on these sexy softwares themselves. So they know what they're looking for. but they're not nice enough to tell you, hey, it's the cotton here. Hey, it's the this
No.
here. Hey, it's the thread here. Hey, it's this company. They're not going to give you any intel. It's up to you to do your own work yourself. What
Right.
small company has the capability, resources, team, all of it? And are they going to get the info? I'm going to call my Chinese supplier and it's against their laws in China to give up who their raw material providers are. So now I'm asking my supplier to commit a federal offense in their own country, and that's okay. I mean, we haven't figured this out in any meaningful way, shape, or
No.
form. And there is no small business coalition that I see in any way, shape, or form going to Congress members to actually make them maybe care about the small business plight in this. They think they're doing so great for the forced labor war, but we're hearing the opposite as well. The flip side of this is, all right, so you turn your backs on those that are in forced labor situations. That's not necessarily to the benefit of those in the forced labor situations. They want you instead to work with the company to get them to take their forced labor employees and get them out of that situation. So now it's my job to take on a social crisis and
Right.
to get the employees of whatever my supplier or to get them to treat them better. Like that's all of a sudden your job now too. So just in case importing wasn't hard enough, now you're supposed to go to your supplier and have them treat their employees fairly and give them a fair wage and not have them in forced labor conditions. And that's, by the way, that's your responsibility too. So take it all on, okay?
Yeah.
It's amazing to me,
Same. That's
right? It's
crazy.
Yeah.
it's like
it's
at what point
ridiculous.
does
Yeah.
it stop? It just doesn't make sense to me. It's not, it's to me, this is a perfect instance of good intentions gone wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, because
I
it's
wish
just
we had
not
3
financially
hours.
feasible. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but we are at the top of the hour and I wish we had a lot more time. But we might pick another subject further down the road and have you back, Jen, because just I could listen to you all day long. There's so much to learn. Somebody was asking, Shushma was asking about recording. Yes, this will be posted on the Global Chamber YouTube channel, and they will also send out a copy with the link, an email with the link to the people that were on today's webinar. So don't worry about that. So Jen, thank you so very much. It's lovely to finally meet you in virtual person.
Yes, you
And
too. It's great to be here.
we appreciate your time. Everybody be sure to check out all the events on the Global Chamber website, globalchamber.org. There are so many webinars and occasional live events going on every day around the world. So just remember, it's great to be global. Thank you so much. Take care, and we will see you next time.
Thank
When
you.
is the
I'm
next
putting
time? I think we've already scheduled it, right?
Yeah, so we're usually the 4th Thursday of the month. I'll talk to you about that, Doug, because I will be in transit on that day. So,
Oh,
but definitely June 27th, for sure. But we'll let you know about May. It'll be posted or unposted,
cool.
depending on what's going on. Okay.
Sounds
So
good.
thank you, everyone.
Thank
Great
you
you.
so
today,
much,
Anita.
Anita.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Jen.
everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks
Great
so
to
Jen.
much.
see you,
Thank
Leslie.
everyone.
Awesome to see you
You
guys.
too,
Take care.
Doug. Bye-bye.